May 15, 1969, Sergeant Mark Thompson walked into the intelligence briefing room carrying a thick folder. Inside were patrol reports from 3 SAS squadron. The reports contained information that should have changed everything. Patrols by 3 SAS squadron in early to mid-May 1969 had recorded 87 sightings, totaling some 957 Viet Cong soldiers assembling in the region of Xuyen Moc, 957 enemy soldiers, gathering in one area, preparing for something big. The Australian SAS had spent weeks collecting this intelligence. They had watched, recorded, documented. Now Thompson was presenting it to the Task Force Command. The American liaison officer looked at the report. He glanced at the numbers. He leaned back in his chair. His response was dismissive. Impossible. No way there are that many enemy troops in that area. Your patrols must be counting the same soldiers multiple times. This intelligence is unreliable. Thompson felt anger rising. His men had risked their lives gathering this information. They had spent days in the jungle, motionless, silent, recording every enemy movement. The SAS did not make mistakes like this. They did not exaggerate. They reported what they saw. But the American officer was not convinced. Neither was the Australian Task Force commander, Brigadier Pearson. The Task Force CO thought a single platoon of 30 assault troopers mounted on a troop of APCs could successfully interdict them. 30 men against nearly 1,000 enemy soldiers. Thompson could not believe what he was hearing. The intelligence was being dismissed. The SAS reports were being ignored. Command was sending a platoon to do what required a battalion. The 2nd D&E platoon was ordered to mount up. 30 soldiers climbed onto armored personnel carriers. They were heading to Xuyen Moc. Their mission was to interdict the enemy force that intelligence said numbered over 900 soldiers. The platoon commander, Lieutenant Marcus Reed, reviewed his orders. He looked at the SAS intelligence reports. The numbers did not make sense. 30 men against 900. This was not interdiction. This was suicide. But orders were orders. Reed gathered his platoon. They moved out from Nui Dat. The APCs rumbled through the jungle. The men checked their weapons. Some joked nervously. Others stayed quiet. Everyone sensed something was wrong. Thompson watched them leave. He returned to SAS Hill. His squadron commander, Major Reginald Beasley, was waiting. Beasley had kicked down the kills boards that other squadrons erected. "We were not there to kill people, but to gain information," he later said. Information that was now being ignored. 2 days passed. The 2nd D and E platoon reached the operational area. Reed ordered his men to dismount and search. They moved through dense jungle. The APCS followed behind. Everything seemed quiet, too quiet. Then the jungle exploded. Machine gun fire erupted from 3 directions. RPGs streaked toward the APCs. Grenades detonated. The platoon was surrounded. Reed shouted orders. His men returned fire. But they were vastly outnumbered. The Viet Cong had been waiting. They had known the Australians were coming. They had prepared positions, set up ambushes, coordinated fields of fire. This was not a small guerrilla force. This was a major enemy unit. Reed called for artillery support. Shells began falling. His men fought desperately. The APCS provided covering fire. Wounded soldiers were dragged behind the vehicles. The fighting lasted for hours. When the platoon finally withdrew, 8 men had been seriously wounded. Several APCs were damaged. Equipment was lost. The enemy melted back into the jungle. The operation had been a disaster. Back at Nui Dat, Thompson received the casualty report. 8 wounded. All because command had refused to believe the SAS intelligence. All because an American liaison officer had dismissed the reports as unreliable. All because 30 men had been sent to face nearly 1,000. 48 hours after the battle, the American liaison officer requested a meeting with Thompson. The officer's attitude had changed. His dismissiveness was gone. He asked to see the original patrol reports, all of them. Thompson spread the documents across the table. 87 separate sightings, multiple patrols, different locations, different times. The data was thorough, detailed, professional. This was not guesswork. This was meticulous intelligence gathering. The American officer studied the reports. He traced the enemy movements on a map. He calculated the numbers. Finally, he looked up. You were right. The intelligence was accurate. We should have listened. Thompson felt no satisfaction. 8 men had been wounded. The operation had failed. The enemy force was still out there, and all of it could have been prevented if command had trusted the SAS reports from the beginning. The incident exposed a fundamental problem. Senior task force officers ignored intelligence provided by Captain Jack Leggett of the AATTV concerning extensive enemy weapon pits located in the light green near Lang Phuoc High, being used to store weapons and ammunition. This was not the first time Australian intelligence had been dismissed. It would not be the last. The Australian SAS operated differently than American units. They moved slowly. They observed patiently. They reported accurately. In a 6-year period, the Australian and New Zealand SAS in Vietnam conducted nearly 1,200 patrols and inflicted heavy casualties on the Viet Cong, including 492 killed. Their intelligence was the best in Vietnam, but it meant nothing if command refused to believe it. Major Beasley called a meeting with his squadron. He addressed the intelligence failure directly. Your work is professional. Your reports are accurate. Command may not always listen, but you will continue to do your job. Lives depend on the information you gather. The SAS patrols returned to the jungle. They continued their reconnaissance missions. They watched, they recorded, they reported. And this time, command started listening. 3 weeks after the failed operation, another major SAS intelligence report came through. Enemy forces were massing in the Mae Tao Mountains. This time, command did not dismiss the reports. At the start of December, 6 RAR and New Zealand forces mounted a month-long operation to clear the Mae Tao Mountains. The operation's success was a direct result of information gathered from SAS patrols. The operation was a success. The enemy was surprised. Casualties were heavy on the Viet Cong side. Australian losses were minimal, all because command had learned to trust the SAS intelligence. The American liaison officer, who had initially dismissed Thompson's reports, requested another meeting. This time, he wanted to learn. He asked about SAS patrol techniques, how they gathered intelligence, how they confirmed sightings, how they avoided detection. While observing large enemy formations, Thompson explained the Australian method. 5-man patrols, extreme patience, sometimes moving only 500 meters per day, observation posts maintained for days, multiple patrols confirming the same information independently. The American officer took notes. He asked questions. He admitted that U.S. patrols moved too fast. They covered too much ground. They missed details that Australian patrols would catch. He wanted to change that. Within months, American long-range reconnaissance patrol units began adopting Australian techniques. The MACV Recondo School, where Australian SAS instructors taught, emphasized the importance of slow, methodical reconnaissance. The lessons from Shu Yen Mok were being learned. But for the 8 wounded soldiers from the 2nd D&E Platoon, the lessons came too late. They had paid the price for command's initial refusal to believe Australian intelligence. Thompson completed his tour in Vietnam. In late 1969, he returned to Australia. He never forgot the intelligence briefing where his reports were dismissed. He never forgot watching that platoon roll out with inadequate force. He never forgot receiving the casualty report 48 hours later. Decades after the war, Thompson was interviewed for a military history project. He was asked what he learned in Vietnam. His answer was simple. Good intelligence means nothing if leadership refuses to listen. We gave them accurate information. They ignored it. Men were wounded because of that decision. 48 hours later, they regretted it. But regret does not heal wounds. The incident at Zuyen Mok became a case study in military intelligence failures. It is taught at staff colleges. It appears in training manuals. It reminds officers that dismissing intelligence based on assumptions can cost lives. The Australian SAS in Vietnam achieved the highest kill ratio of any unit in the war. But their greatest contribution was not kills. It was intelligence. Information that saved lives Information that won battles. Information that command sometimes refused to believe until it was too late. When American officers refused Australian SAS help, they regretted it 48 hours later. But by then, 8 men were wounded, an operation had failed, and a lesson had been learned the hard way. Trust the intelligence. Respect the source. Listen to the professionals. Or pay the price.